Boss, I love philosophy and metaphysics in terms of what the underlying structures of the world are and how we can approach that. And some people would suggest that that's a way that you can not prove God exists and not have a direct personal knowledge of God, but you can make significant progress in understanding the kinds of questions about God that will move probabilities, whether God exists or not, and give you some sense of what that kind of being, the internal characteristics would be. I know you have a less robust confidence in metaphysics, if I'm putting this mildly, and have a rather minimalist view. So I want to understand your view on the capacity of metaphysics as a way of human thinking to deal with the question of God.
Yeah. I think the metaphysics that you're describing is one that certainly is practiced today, but we often refer to it as pre-Kantian metaphysics, typified in the 17th century, but brought back by analytic philosophy in this century.
Exactly.
I think that was a mistake.
Wow, that's a huge comment.
Absolutely.
You've just invalidated half of the Anglo-American philosophy department, maybe 2/3 of them.
Yeah, I quarrel with all of them. I know that. Well, you see, what is this kind of metaphysics? It tries to continue beyond science, but with, I think, is the methods of science. Of course, not with experiments or not with observation, right? But just with reason and insight. Right. And what drives this enterprise, because we would get nowhere without something to drive it, is the demand for explanation. And it's a totally unforgiving, totally demanding.
Oh. That's a wonderful phrase, because I feel it viscerally.
Yeah.
This hunger and thirst and impossible to satiate desire for explanation.
And I would agree with you. It's impossible to satiate it. And it leads, and I agree with Kant here, to the illusions of reason, because it is always going to come up with an answer. And the answer will require more explanation, and there will always be an answer, but the criteria for this answer are not scientific criteria. I've heard metaphysicians like David Lewis and David Armstrong talking about alternatives, and then one of them would say, yes, but we wouldn't like that. And that would be the end of that alternative, okay? And the other thing about the metaphysicians are, and this is what makes it possible, they are satisfied with explanation by postulate.
Yes.
In other words, they need an explanation. They postulate something that will explain. And then they say, well, then that postulate must be right because it explains. There's a wonderful circularity there. You've just got to admire the clever circularity.
There's certainly circularity, but I mean, the idea is that you create a series of assumptions and then test each of the assumptions, and then you come to a conclusion. If you don't like the conclusion, if assuming the logic is correct, then you have to question one or more of the assumptions. I mean, that process is certainly has a scientific feel to it.
The crucial step here was testing the assumptions.
Yes.
Now, what do they test it against?
Okay. Yeah.
Right. They test it against intuitions, which means unschooled, presumptions we have. They tease out presuppositions that probably came to us when we were in high school or whatever. They test it against the logical consistency, but, well, there's always going to be a logically consistent answer. So unlike the scientist who tests it against nature, who devises an experiment to test, who goes to observations to test, the metaphysician just tests it against himself and says, am I satisfied with this explanation? Now, to me, that makes it a game that cannot possibly lead anywhere. Insight and reason can certainly clarify things. They cannot lead you to new truth.
Well, certainly people can critique a deductive reasoning, and basically what you're saying is that would just throw out the obvious mistakes. But even where the reasoning is flawless and perfect, you're still left hostage to all of your assumptions, be it about God or anything else.
Yes, yeah. Well, then what happens, of course, is that people get excited about the interesting ones, right? Yeah. And they should be interested in the interesting ones, and it's intellectually stimulating. And we can get insights from people's new imagination and what they make up.
Isn't that worth something?
It is worth something, but it's not something that leads you to truth, right?
Well, let's hold on that, because if you have, through this process, deductive process that is founded on a series of assumptions, and some of those assumptions give you insights that you didn't have before, even though you can never confirm those insights as truth, you now have a richer understanding.
Yes, yeah. And from that point of view, I would also value it. And I love reading Leibniz, for example. I'm an empiricist, but I like reading the rationalists. I think Leibniz and Descartes are just absolutely wonderful constructions that they came up with. And Bradley, now, and Whitehead said, always in metaphysics there will be a master who produces this wonderful architectonic, and then there will be a student who reduces it to absurdity.
Well, Bradley wrote this like 500-page book coming up with, what is it, the one or the single force of the universe? I mean, I didn't follow all 500 pages, but I mean, I enjoyed going on the ride, but I had no confidence on the conclusion.
Me too. No, I think that reading Appearance and Reality is a wonderful experience. Okay? And also his application in ethics, the ethical studies, is a beautiful application of what he does, and you can see his originality and so on.
Wasn't he the one who said that the people who criticize metaphysics are those who are doing metaphysics...
condemned to do it themselves.
Who have condemned themselves by the process of criticizing it.
Yes.
They have become a metaphysician themselves.
Yeah, well, I sometimes worry about that. For example, in my views about the self, I think they sound rather metaphysical. Yes, and in taking a critical line like that, claiming that by this road you will not ever discover new truths about the world, I am taking a position in metaphysics.
Right.
But I should also mention that there's other kinds of metaphysics. The metaphysics, for instance, of Heidegger, where Heidegger writes about metaphysics, right? Now, it may have a very different function. It may not be an attempt to continue science by other means. Right. You see?
Yeah, it's not as analytic. It's
not analytic, and phenomenological ontology, as the essay is called, is a very different enterprise. It's to discover the structures of lived experience. And that too is a kind of metaphysics. And that now I think might be more worthwhile. But it is not exactly popular in the Anglo-Saxon speaking, in the Anglo-Saxon world, right?